Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and viewers. If you are watching us on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Hello. Doing fine. How are you?
Excellent. And we are joined this week by Leigh Winner, who is a former enlisted U.S. Air Force member and an intelligence specialist. In 2018, she was given the longest prison sentence ever imposed for unauthorized release of government information to the media after she leaked an intelligence report about Russian interference in the 2016 election. She was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in federal prison and is here with us this week to chat about this and other topics. So welcome to the show, Reality.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I would also like to point out that that's the cool. You also win the coolest name prize ever.
I hate my name. It's not a name.
Well, I think it's awesome.
Yeah. So what's the history of your name?
Well, my sister was born 13 months before I was, and at the time there was the old the LeMays classes where the dad would coach the mom through the birth. I don't know if they do that anymore.
They do, at least when I did it.
And so my dad wore a shirt when my sister was born called "I Coached a Real Winner." And the family name was Winner. And so, when my mom found out she was pregnant with me, he kind of called shotgun. He wanted to name this one, and he made me his real winner.
Nice.
Very nice. And
stop T-shirt.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably heard about every sort of permutation of your name used in different ways over your life. So we will try to avoid any sort of catchy dad joke type of phraseology.
Indeed. No puns.
So to start us off first, I want to kind of get a little bit better sense of who you are, of who Reality is. I mean, most people, know you because of, the thing you did and sort of the time you served. But I sort of want to, before I get into all that, because I think it's important, I want to get a better sense of who you are. So maybe, you can start us off by letting us know, who's the bigger polyglot, you or Pete Buttigieg?
Oh my gosh, Mayor Pete, hands down. He is so talented with languages.
Got it. Because how many languages can you speak?
English on a good day, some conversational Farsi, some really bad Spanish. My Spanish only comes out when I'm very hungry. But yeah, I can read a lot. I can read classical Latin. I can figure out Arabic and Pashto, of course. But the speaking is so difficult. Anybody who can fluently speak another language, hands down, they're amazing.
Yeah,
what was the motivation for learning these different languages?
Well, luckily in high school, we had this really amazing Latin teacher, and she made it fun and interesting. And she really got into the sense of when you learn another language, you are immersed in a different world. And so for Latin, that world is ancient Rome. And so if you are a history buff or a history geek, and you're not just doing grammar and conjugations, you're also getting lessons in ancient Rome. It's a really accessible way to that language. And you get to understand their politics. And I think that was the first time it really clicked with me, is that you can understand how a nation from the bottom up is formed and how their politics influences them, as far as deciding to become a linguist to understand international and global conflicts from the languages of the countries that are having these issues.
Yeah.
So I kind of put those pieces together really early on, that if you really want to understand somebody, you need to learn their language.
Got it. And
Makes a lot of sense.
What's the name of your cat?
My cat, the guy in the background, that is Fiona.
Okay. Got it. All right, good. I just want to make sure that that our the people that are watching this on YouTube get a good sense of everything going on, and those that are listening on the podcast, shame on you. So did the languages help you, or were the languages a part of why you decided to enlist in the Air Force?
The language was the part that I decided towards my senior year of high school. I realized I want to become a linguist. And there's only one school in the country where that's possible, and that's the Defense Language Institute. I didn't want to be a college student. I didn't want to be a kid for 4 more years. There's this war in Afghanistan, and I wanted to be part of it as soon as possible. So I called the Army recruiters and I said, hey, I want to be a linguist in Middle Eastern or North African languages, because that's where, the conflict zones were. And they laughed at me until I, tested really high in everything. And of course, my parents were throwing a fit because Army was for the dumb kids and they wanted me to join the Air Force like my stepbrother. But the Air Force, they're very, apathetic. Like, you need to chase them down. Versus the Army, once they saw my scores, they said, you don't have to go to high school. We can ship you out next week. They were chasing that enlistment bonus. And it really made you feel wanted and appreciated, versus the Air Force was like, yeah, you might leave in 9 months unless you mess it up. But it was worth sticking it through. I noticed in language school that, in the Air Force, you really are treated like an asset. You are given time to learn these languages and to take your studies seriously. Mm-hmm. So it all worked out in the end. I started with Farsi. My goal was to get to Pashto or Urdu. Mm-hmm. And so eventually I was able to jump sideways and get into a Pashto class and become fluent in that language.
When did you enlist?
I enlisted in 2010.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So I enlisted in 2002, like early. So basically after 9/11, I think pretty similar to you. Like, I wanted to do something back in college. I was a super big hippie, big afro. I've got people in my life that still don't believe I joined the Army. Because like out of all the different like fields, I also did the infantry. And mind you, like, I had a decent ASVAB score. It was like 90 something. And to your point, like the Army was basically handing out enlistments. I mean, like nobody's business, because they just needed people. But in hindsight, I wish I joined the Air Force, because like they always had the better like DFACs and chow and stuff like that. So, yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe like your early life, kind of, high school, maybe up into, going into the service?
So high school in South Texas, I had a very strange father. He was actually a drug addict. He was part of the opioid epidemic. In the early 90s, he had broken his back in several places, and they had given him the miracle Oxycontin pain reliever. And so by the early 2000s, he was trafficking it to, maintain his habit, but also have enough cash for me and my sister. So it was kind of in those times where going to Mexico every single weekend was normal. It was shopping. It was fun. And that was where we had all of our dental work done, because my father could pay cash. He could decide however much he was going to pay them that weekend. And then they would do our braces, and then we would come back to the States. So he was a very different minded sort of person. And I remember that he always talked to us like we were adults. He wanted to talk politics. In the car on the way to his house, or anytime we were in a car, there was no music, no radio. It was just him talking about whatever subject he wanted to talk about, because he was, he had a master's in theology and psychology. And so he always wanted to find that mixture of when somebody's psychologically vulnerable to violence, to where you can use theology to inspire that. So 9/11 was like his biggest life obsession. Like, how could you inspire somebody to do that to other people, and then to use their faith to do that, and not just like the geopolitics alone, because the hijackers, you really need them completely brainwashed and thinking that they're doing the right thing. So those were the subjects that we were basically spoken to from our father from a very young age. And then going into high school, I would just always like sports. was always competing. Even though I was 2 years behind my sister, I had to have a higher GPA than her and do everything like a little bit better. But of course, she was the perfect student. So I got away with a lot. You know, I think teachers grew tired of me within the first 6 weeks of school every year because they were always like, I have another Winner kid. And then I'd sit in the back and like, you know, make fun of the teacher the whole class and then have perfect scores and everything. I still don't actually know how to study. I'm used to being able to look at information and memorize it on the first go. So it's like academically I did really well, but I didn't really have a purpose until I decided to enlist in the Air Force.
Oh, cool.
Man, that's fascinating. And I'm sorry that about your father's addiction. That's hard. I've been through the pain of that myself in certain ways, and so it's definitely not fun to experience as a person or as someone who loves someone who is suffering from that. So sorry that happened. I know it shaped you. I'm sure it shaped you in ways that you don't even know. Totally. Yeah. And you had mentioned your father's theology degree and his psychology degree, and this this kind of obsession that he had with how to maybe inspire people. And it kind of heard from what you said, like how to take faith and inspire people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do, i.e. violent acts or whatever. What kind of help me understand, how did you feel about that, and how did that impact your own sense of faith? If you are even a person, if you'd even consider yourself a person of faith, how has all your upbringing shaped you in terms of your faith or lack of faith coming up and till now?
Well, so my father was just this weird enigma of growing up. He would always tell us that we went to an Episcopalian school, so Catholic light. He identified as Catholic. He identified as somebody who spoke to the Virgin Mary every night. But he would also tell us that what you're learning, that Christianity is historically wrong. He was one of those people, and, now it's kind of common that, Jesus wasn't born in December. He wasn't born in the wintertime. But in the 90s, telling your 5-6-year-olds that, and then they're going to go take that to church school and correct their teachers, that we shouldn't be doing Christmas right now, or the nativity needs to be done in the spring. He was always like 20 years ahead of his time, even though he never did much with it. Always very conflicting. And then as we got older, he just started basically saying things like, the 10 Commandments is just a set of social law. Why would you, the guy who says adultery is illegal is probably the guy with the prettiest wife. The guy who says don't steal is probably the guy who has enough to be stolen from. So he always would challenge the morality behind a lot of these so-called golden rules. And it left us really confused. It does to this day kind of leave me kind of stranded from my faith, and kind of looking at, the Bible or the Torah as a historical record, as opposed to something to be believed in, or he always wanted it to point out, from whose angle are these being written, and to whose benefit. And he always questioned that. So he was very much a rebel in his thinking.
That's really interesting, and I appreciate you being open about that. I don't know if that journey that he went on or you are going on is as unique as you might think. I mean, I grew up basically an atheist, and I've spent more of my life as an atheist than I have a believer. And I still, I have trouble understanding stuff like that. That's why I have Pastor Josh. I'm like, hey, Pastor Josh, what does this mean? And he'll tell me something, and I'll be really rebellious, and but that doesn't mean that. But I really appreciate you saying that. But I'm curious, how much of your faith or faith life did you find come up when you were in prison? Did that help, hinder? Did that affect anything? Did you get a chance to sort of like reconnect with your faith?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. So once I had moved out of the house and joined the military at age 18, I actually started practicing Judaism, and I started going into this deep dive of, the historical foundation of Christianity, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of turned away from the idea of there being a Messiah, of the messianic prophecies having been fulfilled through Christ. And so then I am fully immersed in that. And I'm actually in Augusta, Georgia, for the first time connecting with the Jewish community, being invited to Passover, really coming into my own, because Augusta, Georgia has an amazing Jewish community. And I get kind of abducted, right? And sent to Lincoln County, Georgia, small county jail. And there's pork on the tray. And I said, hey, I either need to have zero meat on this tray, and I was a spiritual vegetarian and vegan at the time. But, I also said that there can't be pork. I could probably eat around chicken. I could trade that to somebody else, but there cannot be pork on this tray. I'm Jewish. And they said, I don't know what that is. Like they just, I don't know if they were willfully ignorant or if they just wanted to, have plausible deniability. And the other thing was that Monday through Friday, either like at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m., ladies from the local church, evangelical churches, would come in and do Bible study programs. And almost nobody would get out of bed for it. So we're just in like a one-room cell. Bunks are against the back wall. There's a table in the center. These ladies would come in, set up their Bibles, and people would roll over and cover their head. And I wasn't raised like that. I wasn't raised to ignore people. So I would go and engage them and talk to them, and that was when I started having Bibles sent in Greek, in Latin, in Spanish. Because if I'm not going to receive the word that they're giving to us, I'm going to sit there and read it in as many languages as possible just to engage them, just to make their time worth it. And also, those were like some of the only literate people you would have a conversation with. So it was very much like a intellectual lifeline, even if I wasn't really like willing to absorb it or, be preached to. They were still really nice people. I'm in touch with one of them even to this day. She met my family. Just a really happy, blessed person. Once I got to federal prison, in the feds, there are Jewish communities. And so was able to go back to my roots, be able to observe Shabbat, and absorb the different holy days and the fast days and not have pork on my tray and stuff like that. And actually met some ladies actually from Israel. There was an Israeli girl there, Jews from around the world. There was a Ukrainian lady. I learned to read Hebrew, and just, it meant a lot to me. It was like, just like if that's the big thing you have going on every week is like trying to get to your religious service and enjoy it and learn how to do it, because you also had to be the advocate for it in prison. Every time a holiday came up, you would have to go to the chaplains and be like, Rosh Hashanah is coming up. We need this, that, and the other. And even though the chaplain does it every year, the chaplains be like, well, why do you need this, that, and the other? Like, it's a quiz. So you have to become your own advocate. You have to become an expert in every holiday and basically campaign from one holy day to the next for the right to get to do it. You need to know the candle lighting time so that you can get released from the unit to go light the candles. And you're constantly fighting for it. And there's so many different times where other inmates kind of started catching on that even though people could leave in flocks on Sunday morning to go to church. They never missed their Sunday worship service. For whatever reason, on Friday night, if the officer didn't want to let us go to Shabbat, they didn't have to. During Hanukkah, if we weren't ahead of schedule, if we didn't beg the officers every single night, Hanukkah's 8 nights, we need to go light these candles before sunset, then they wouldn't let us out. And so there was this really interesting time where I had a falling out with some friends. And of course, in prison, where you sit is political. And so I lost my table. And I could have sat with, so I had some other places where I could have sit. But one of my friends said, hey, come sit with me and my girlfriend. Well, his girlfriend was a white supremacist. So there I am, like in the middle of Hanukkah, sitting at the white supremacist table. And they're all asking me, like, don't you have to go to Hanukkah? Like, I had my Siddur out. Like, I always had my holy book with me. And I was just sitting there like, yeah, no, candle lighting is in 7 minutes. I need to go. And so basically all of these people, I mean, they had swastikas, they had lightning bolts, they were Aryan this, Aryan that, whatever. They acted a whole fool and got the officer's attention, and they all made it seem like they needed to go to Hanukkah.
Wow.
And so we bum rush the door, the officer opens the door, and they're like, okay, Winner, bye. And then I got out. They actually helped me. And seeing that and having them understand like what it means to be like a minority faith in the American prison system, educating these people. These people didn't finish middle school, didn't go to high school. They didn't know what the Holocaust was. So many people repping these symbols without knowing the history behind them. But then they came together and got me to my holiday. It was just really inspiring. It was one of those moments where like, you couldn't have made that up.
Wow, that is an unbelievable story. The image of that is absolutely heartwarming. Thank you for sharing that. Hearing that you struggle in prison to get your faith recognized, hurts my heart. I wish it was different. What was that like in prison? How was that like? I guess what did your experience show you about the prison system in America?
Well, the first thing was that it's completely inhumane and unnecessary. I mean, just from the county jail system, the people that I would see over and over and over again. I mean, I met half of Lincoln County in that jail several times over. The fact that we detain people for the most minor offenses and that 90% of these offenses come from poverty and addiction, and that having them in that jail does nothing to solve it. They clean up, they dry out, and as soon as they're back out on the street, they're using again because of the trauma that they endured while being incarcerated. That the county jail system is also the #1 mental health treatment for many rural counties in our country. That there was a woman, she wasn't there. She was always screaming and talking to someone who wasn't there. And she lived in the dumpster behind the Hardys. And they didn't want her living in their dumpster, so they always called the cops to remove her. And when the cops would come remove her, she would get agitated and scared, and she would attack a cop. So now she's being arrested with battery to an officer, but she's not competent to be charged. And she's also not safe enough to go into the cell block with us. So they have her in solitary confinement. And we would sit there and listen to try to figure out, they didn't know her name. They didn't have an ID on her. They didn't have anything for her. And so they would catch her, hold her in solitary until there was like a state hospital that could take her until she could be transported to that hospital. And that happened 3 times in the 16 months that I was incarcerated there. They had no cure. They had no stable home for this woman other than to catch her and pick her up over and over again. And once you get to prison, every decision of your day is made for you. when you need to be up, what your bed needs to look like, what your job is. You don't get to choose your job. You get to try to. And if you know how to work the politics, if you know who to talk to, you can leverage yourself into the positions that you want. But there's no autonomy. And there's no reward for doing the right thing, because even if you work 7 days a week or however much, you're making 12 cents an hour. You know, basically somebody who doesn't work, whose family puts $100 on their books every month, is going to be better off. So it only highlights inequalities. People who are mentally ill are victimized all the time. People who are violent and disruptive are rewarded for that because nobody has time to deal with that. Their needs are met over anybody else's. In fact, towards the end of the COVID lockdown, I was tired of, pardon my French, but doing the right thing and talking right and constantly getting shit on all the time got old. So I became disruptive. I started threatening cops. I started calling them derogatory names. I started being that person who was getting the whole unit shut down because I was having an episode. And I never got written up for it. In fact, they would actually appease me or listen to me when I was screaming and flipping tables, as opposed to, hey, I'm trying to have a word with you, or I'm trying to let a journalist know what they're doing to us. You know, when you get that positive reward, you only double down in that. And it's taken the last year of not being incarcerated to understand how to communicate with people without being overtly aggressive. And then understanding that in the real world, aggression does not get you anything. So I had to be deprogrammed from everything that I learned how to get what I wanted in prison. So if that was the correctional system, they only put me on the fast track to picking up another felony on the outside.
Wow.
And when you understand that half the people there are on their second bid, or they've already done the prison tour, they can tell you what every prison in the country is like. And that when they get out, it's going to be so hard as a felon. And the transition housing is going to be so difficult and so stressful that you look forward to going back to prison. That's where they make their money from. They want repeat offenders. They want us to come in and out and in and out. Just understanding the history of incarceration in this country, all the way back from the 13th Amendment being passed, that yes, you are a marketable commodity, that your body simply being in there is the profit. It doesn't matter what they offer you, that they're feeding you for pennies on the dollar, that if you do get, if you eat yourself to the point to where you're diabetic, your insulin is subsidized at 500% above market rate. They want you to be diagnosed with diabetes. They get off on that. And there's no education. You have to fight for your education to the point to where it's like, you get so tired of just asking for the things that make you better. You know, you're just going to do what's fun. You're going to do the easier thing to get by. You're going to get sucked into TV shows and be trivial and be petty, because doing the right thing only brings hardship and it only brings further harassment from the staff on you. And so if that's the correctional system, we have a problem.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, that's intense. And I feel like I'm really appreciative of you saying that, because, that's the point of view I don't think I've heard. I've heard that our prison systems are pretty jacked up and it's basically like slavery sort of reincarnate. But just hearing it from you really kind of hit home. So, but I do want to switch gears a little bit and just talk about your family. I know I saw in your 60-minute interview that your family really kind of played a big part in your sanity, your hope. So I want to kind of give you a few minutes, just kind of talk about like what type of support system did you have when you were in prison?
Yes, I was, blessed and privileged beyond measure. My family has never gone through anything like this. at all. In fact, in my family, I had a half sister who did some time based off drug charges. And I have an aunt who struggled with addiction for many years. And she was in and out of county jails up in Wisconsin. And I knew that the family reaction to that is, well, just, pretend like they don't exist until they get straightened out. And then if they seem sober, if they seem like they got it together, you can add them on Facebook, maybe text them, but you never see them again. So when I got arrested and everything seemed very, very serious, that was what I was expecting, and I even told my family, like, get as much of my stuff that you can fit. Don't, take it back home. Just if you can, please just hold on to it for me. If you have the space, take care of my cat. But I wasn't asking for them to actually do anything else. And they stepped up. And when we experienced that first bail hearing where the prosecution came out swinging, saying everything in my life has been gearing up to commit an act of betrayal against the United States, that was when it just set something off in my mother. And she said, this stops here. We are going to show the world who our daughter is. And she decided that she was never going to give up on me. And her career as she was the regional director of Child Protective Services in South Texas. Growing up, her career came first all the time. Like she lived to work and she lived for her mission. And that's where we learned that your life is your mission. And she gave that up. She bought into her retirement early and just came and lived in Georgia by herself. And I hated that. I hated when she was alone. I knew the neighborhood where I lived. And so I knew she wasn't like safe. And it tore me apart, but she was not going to leave. She took it upon herself to be my voice, to be my representation, and to push back every time that something horrible was said about me. And my sister, for a while, she was working on her PhD. So like she was so close to finishing her PhD, and I just went and jacked everything up. And she didn't fall apart. She said, I need to finish my PhD so I can support my sister, so she can be more present. So I didn't really see or hear much from her until, she finished her PhD, and then she kind of joined in the fight. She was working professionally, but always willing to do an interview, always willing to do a podcast, willing to make these connections, to have who I was heard. And I didn't expect that from her, simply because, like I said, our family history has always been let people sort it out themselves, and then we'll try talking to them when they're stable. My family has gone through so much on my behalf. I mean, my biggest regret about all of this is not only did I violate an oath that I took, to the NSA, to the United States, but this hurt them so much more than it hurt me. Like, I could take anything, but to know that it was hurting my family, that was the hardest part. That's the most guilt that I'll ever have.
Wow. So, I guess maybe you can, let your mom know that, I think her mission was accomplished, because
Yes.
I knew about your story, just because I was sort of a rabid, Russia person, got really strong feelings about Russia and Trump. We won't get into that, but when I came across your story, and kind of what you did, I kind of went out of my way to kind of figure out who you were, and most of the stuff that I could find seemed like it was stuff that your mom was posting. Like I checked the other day, like your mom follows me on Twitter, and I had no idea. so like your mom did a really good job, and you can tell her thank you from Faithful Politics at sort of showing who her daughter was, and I just think that that's awesome. But I'd like to kind of maybe get into like what it was that you did, and instead of me sort of summarizing what news reports say, like maybe you can kind of give us the Reader's Digest version of why you went to prison.
Right. Well, it was 2017, late April, early May. I felt really conflicted about a classified document that I saw at work. And if you can remember, that year in particular, every Friday there was a leak, but there were never consequences. So it was just kind of like everybody's waiting for the leak. And I saw this document and said, okay, that's going to be the leak on Friday. And it wasn't. And then you're just kind of in that moment of, this needs to be out there because our society is tearing itself apart. Well, the media is also fomenting this one side versus the other. And there's a vacuum. There's one question mark that's allowing that to happen. And I felt like I was looking at the solution. And so I printed it and I stole it from NSA by folding it and putting it in my pantyhose. And I violated what is known as 793E of the Espionage Act of 1917, which is simply willful retention. I retained the document, and disclosure. I sent it to the Intercept of national defense information. And so the NSA and the FBI determined that what I sent was national defense information. So I did break the law. And so while we were trying to decide if we were going to take that to trial or not, I had never denied being the person that did it. So even when the FBI came to execute the search warrant for further classified information, which I didn't have, I told them what I did. And one of the hardest things about the Espionage Act is that there is no mens rea or criminal intent involved. And you cannot argue whether or not the information was in fact national defense information. Once it's labeled as such by the prosecution, if the label sticks, it sticks. So the only question would have been, did she or did she not do it? That was the only thing the prosecution had to prove, which I had already never contested. I had thought that I didn't understand the law at the time. So I had always thought, well, as long as they know why I did it, I'll be safe. You know, as long as there was that whistleblower intent or no intention for harm, I would be safe. And in fact, I wasn't. And so because I had always just wanted to take responsibility, when I was offered 5 years and 3 months, I accepted the plea deal. And I have all sorts of restrictions on my speech. I'm still on supervised release today. I'll be on supervised release or federal probation till November 2024. Instead of being able to argue why I did what I did, I just chose to accept the punishment and take responsibility and accept guilt.
Wow. You know, it's what a heart-wrenching story when you find something you feel like the American public wants to see or should see. Not even wants to, but should see. And you made a really hard choice, something that you knew wouldn't be looked on well, but you felt like you had to take the risk so that you could provide information to the public. And I think that, you know, that showed bravery on your part to do that. Did you expect, so when you sent this to the Intercept, did you expect that they would link you to this document? I mean, what were your expectations as you went out there? Were you just like, yeah, what? I don't need to say anymore. What were your expectations like, and how did that? What was that like inside as you realized that someone had revealed your identity?
So my expectations were, I don't think I had any. I certainly did not view what I did in a criminal or judicial aspect. So I did what I did, and I never thought about consulting a lawyer. So when the FBI showed up, I was like, I didn't even know that the FBI were really like law enforcement. I just thought, okay, the FBI is here. They do whatever they want. You know, if I were to ask for an attorney or not say anything, then they could still do whatever they wanted. Like they would probably disappear me even faster. Like I didn't actually understand that FBI agents are federal police, because I had no idea of what the criminal justice system even was at that point. Never, other than getting pulled over a few times, I'd never been involved in that. So I had no criminal reference to what I needed to do to prepare myself. I also was naive enough into where I thought, yes, I broke all these rules, but I did it for a good reason, right? Nobody's going to see me as like a really bad, nefarious person. And then even though I did very little to actually hide my identity, even though I anonymously submitted it, did I think that the Intercept would send an actual scan with the forensic evidence, with the fold line, with there's like a watermark on NSA paper directly to the NSA? Did I know that they were on first name basis with people still in the NSA? No. You know, I broke the law and I was probably going to go down for it anyway. And I was always going to accept responsibility once accused by the federal government, because that's the right thing to do. Did I expect that the Intercept would pretty much give them everything, to include the envelope with the Augusta stamp on it? Like, no, I didn't think that would happen that fast. In fact, I did what I did, and 2 weeks later, there's nothing in the national news about it. And so I thought, oh my God, that was really stupid. Nothing happened. I still have a career. Let's never do this again. Like, it's like, oh, okay, nothing happens and I just risked everything for nothing. Nobody saw the document. It's just probably in the trash somewhere. No damage happened. Let me focus on my career and let me do the right thing from now on. So yeah, I mean, I had zero expectations. In fact, I mean, now I would probably like grab myself and shake myself and be like, what do you really expect is going to happen from this? Other than you're going to go through a lot of pain and misery for 5 years.
God, that's so wild. I mean, it's one of those, like, it's unfortunate that maybe the Intercept didn't protect your identity and maybe the capacity that you assumed they would, but eventually the word got out. And I think that, your actions did kind of open up a very necessary can of worms in sort of the public discourse about, Russia's interference in the election. Because, so I'm reading this book now about the Seth Rich murder in DC, written by Andy Kroll. He was on their show just recently, and in it he talks about, how Julian Assange sort of took this Seth Rich story and, tried to pose it as if like he was an informant for WikiLeaks. And as I was reading that, I got to thinking like how Julian Assange became interested in like your particular case. I mean, he even went as far as offering like a $10,000 reward for, information about a reporter for the Intercept that had helped, identify, who you were as the leaker. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that. I mean, say what you will about Julian Assange, and I think that he's probably got a lot of shadiness surrounding him, but like, how did that make you feel, to know that he was trying to, sort of out this reporter from the Intercept?
Yeah, I mean, a lot can be said about Julian Assange. I mean, anybody caught up in incarceration and having so much about like your personality as opposed to your lawful or unlawful conduct being used against you, I'm sympathetic to that, because that was like 90% of my case. I do remember when I was first arrested, like he did tweet about me, and he kind of just, I mean, he nailed it. He said, this is a young woman up against the wall, you know? I wasn't part of this bigger network, or, you know, wasn't trying to subvert anything or go against the government. I was just a young woman who didn't really understand what she was getting into. Thought I was going to help. You know, so I really appreciated that take on it. I wasn't aware about this whole thing about trying to find that person from the Intercept, but I do know that since my arrest, 2 other people had been arrested and tried under 793E. The same exact thing. Both released information to the Intercept, and both were outed by the same journalist. So it's kind of like the Intercept has lost all veracity and lost all integrity. In fact, that same person, John Kiriakou, basically comes out and says he is a CIA operative, like he is a plant. You know, kind of outed him last fall. Because it was just violating every rule of journalism, you know? I mean, you can try to authenticate something. You can try to see if something's, you know, you can verify something without giving up your source. And this person repeatedly has done so. And I think what's even more grotesque about it with regard to the Intercept is that they then make money off of trying to champion the person they just got arrested. So always trying to talk about my prison conditions, always trying to talk about Terry Aubrey or Daniel Hale, talk about what they went through, as if like you were the defenders when, you know, we chose to break the law, but you also didn't have to make it that much easier and to blow all of our possibilities to defend ourselves in court.
Yeah, I mean, did they at least help with legal fees or anything like that?
They did, but it was more of First Look Media, which is above the Intercept and the corporate chain. It did step in and take care of my legal fees. They went and got a legal team. However, I retained my public defenders, who were always at odds with this legal team. And I would always hear like, you know, these lawyers, no matter how much money, their client is the Intercept. So the Intercept never had any blame in the court. We never spoke about, you know, their way of sort of grooming people to leak, of trying to tell their audience that they would keep them safe, of, you know, trying to make people believe that this is something that all of their information was gained through these leaks. And that's why if you do it, you'll be safe too, because nobody's been caught. So, I mean, it was like really weird. Like if you get sucked into it, if you believe that they're the only media outlet that's giving you the real news, that's holding the United States government accountable, it's incredibly compelling until you see the other side of it. Like, no, they're actually in direct communication with the government at all times and are willing to give up sources and then pay for those sources legal fees as long as they are never culpable in court.
Wow.
I've lost all my faith in the Intercept.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And it's a side that I don't think I've ever heard before, just about
me neither.
The Intercept. So I guess ProPublica is the next. Like maybe we'll be ProPublica until we hear otherwise. But you know, you bring up the Espionage Act, and I'm sure that you're probably getting bombarded with all kinds of questions about this kind of stuff. But I'm you know, so recently our former president Donald Trump, who Josh voted for, by the way,
in 2016.
And he's
not in 2020. I voted for the Libertarians that one.
So I always give him a hard time about that. So he's in the news because of the Espionage Act as well. And I'm curious to kind of get sort of your hot take on everything going on, and especially kind of in the context of, like your own personal situation. I mean, like I saw in the DOJ's filing a couple weeks back, they showed a picture of all these folders laid out on the floor with confidential, top secret, all kinds of stuff on it, and it got me thinking, kind of in preparation for this interview, like that those seem like multiple documents that would easily, fit under this Espionage Act, sort of provision. I mean, I don't know what was in them. I don't think anybody does, but one can only assume that it would be equally damaging, for anybody to have that level, that quantity of documents. So if you've seen the picture, like what came across your mind, when you saw that, and kind of what's sort of your big takeaway from everything going on with Trump right now?
Right. So the Espionage Act has actually caught some verified spies, right? You have individuals like the number one lady under Fidel Castro, who was passing secrets to Cuba for 30-something years. The couple out of West Virginia who were trying to sell secrets to Brazil and were immediately turned in to the FBI because Brazil wasn't having it. There should be laws so that those people cannot do that anymore. And once caught, there's a penalty for it. However, when you look at 793E, it's incredibly vague of, willful retention and disclosure. In order for disclosure, you have to know where the document went. You have to be able to prove that it was disclosed to, and then you have to have that target. You have to know that it went somewhere. Of national defense information. National defense information does not have to be classified. And that is up to any federal DA to determine whether or not to classify or to label a piece of information, classified, confidential, top secret, or not, as national defense information. And that's where there's no ifs, ands, or buts. And that's why this is such a political law, because you can have federal DAs deciding that certain information is national defense information. And even if you bring in the former, like we had William Leonard, the former classification czar under President Bush, come in to court to try to tell the judge, we don't know if this was national defense information. And the judge said, that is irrelevant. That does not apply. So in this case, it's kind of being used in the former president's favor, where you're not seeing a federal DA, you're not seeing a federal prosecutor being assigned saying national defense information was retained and disclosed. Because at the end of the day, when you want to talk about espionage, there needs to be a recipient. Who is the recipient? Who is the intent? Even in conspiracy to commit espionage, where somebody is caught trying to sell defense information to somebody that they believed was a foreign national or an agent of a foreign country. So one of the things is as this investigation goes on, whether they know and they're not telling us, or they simply do not know if there was a recipient, and whether or not that constitutes as espionage, or whether or not anything he had in those folders, would a prosecutor be willing to define it as national defense information? I will agree that it appears that there are laws, and most of them are misdemeanors. I know he upgraded it to a felony in some instances in 2018 of mishandling classified information, of, walking out to Starbucks with your email address, which is controlled information, not necessarily classified. That's a misdemeanor, could be a felony, right? What I did could be a felony under mishandling classified information. So even the charge that federal prosecutors choose to use is highly politicized and is going to change from one court district to the next. So that's why we are not seeing any indictments against the former president, because if you do have a Justice Department who does not feel like it's politically advantageous right now to indict, they can basically read these very arbitrary, broad, vague laws that are over 100 years old and apply to like ship movements and submarine locations and say, this wasn't the information that we found at Mar-a-Lago. Maybe they haven't. I'm not saying that they can or can't indict. That's totally up to them. But I think that this pause and this sort of skepticism is going to set a very interesting legal precedent for the next leaker to say, basically, well, I had one document and I want to know why this is national defense information versus what was found at Mar-a-Lago was that national defense information, and really kind of hold the Justice Department's feet to the fire on either reforming these laws to be very, very specific in the conduct that they're targeting, or to be applied more evenly versus a civilian or a former official. This is a really interesting time, and I think that we could actually use this not to strengthen these laws, because no matter how strong we make these laws, if the Justice Department does not want to charge a former president with espionage, they will not. But if we make these laws more vague and more binding, then the next leaker to the media is going to get 80 years in prison for a memo that wasn't even classified. Every time we do that, the double-edged sword is always sharper on the backswing.
I really like that quote. I'm going to quote that. That'll preach. That might preach this this
preach.
weekend, actually. That's good. So there's a lot of information right there. It's awesome. I mean, it's amazing. All your grasp of all the intricacies. I suppose you would know that, having it, being so closely associated with these acts and everything, and wanting to know what's really going on. But what I heard is you have to have a recipient. It has to be your knowingly taking it from where it's supposed to be to somewhere it's not supposed to be, past the invisible wall or whatever it is where it says it can't go past this point. And then you have to have an intended recipient, but you had said a foreign, but that's not actually labeled in there, that it has to be a foreign actor or something.
Right.
So I guess my question is, you have all these different, like, it's a little bit of a bigger question wrapped up in like bigger questions wrapped up into one. But what is this like? What does this really tell us about our entire justice system? When maybe like you get jail time, 5 years, and yet there are other people that have been officials that have given information to, less reputable sources or for less reputable causes, and have not gotten any jail time. And assuming Trump won't get any jail time, who knows? Who knows what they're going to do? Maybe I'd love to know if you think he should or not, if you feel like you can't answer that. But what does this say about our justice system and how it treats people equal under law? What do you think?
Right. So I think that the Espionage Act is not a readily accessible example of that. But if you look at like white-collar crimes, in trading, embezzlement, and wire fraud, the discrepancies are huge. Whether or not women do it or men do it, you're going to see differences in the sentences. If a man does it, it was just good business. If a woman does it, she's the kingpin of a corporate scheme. I've seen discrepancies. 2 women both charged with wire fraud. One woman was white and her wire fraud went up to like $3 million, and she got 7 years in federal prison. And another woman was, she was black, and she was the head of a recording studio in Atlanta, and she wire frauded like $35,000 from Florida to Georgia, and she got 14 years. So just depending on how the DAs can choose to charge somebody and the weapons that they can use, that they have at their disposal, the law that they can cite, whether, 98% of all federal charges there's a plea deal involved. They do not like taking things to court. They do not like taking things in front of a jury. So they're not going to aim for the defendants that have all the resources to take any sort of charge to trial. They don't want to take it to trial. So they always go for the low-hanging fruit. Another thing that they use is pretrial detention. Whether you have a white-collar crime or a violent crime, most people charged with federal crimes are detained pretrial. That's another source of pressure. These people are losing their jobs, they're losing their homes, they're having, family drama, and you know that your family is more accessible once you're in prison. So you'll do anything possible to get to prison where you can actually start to move forward in your life. That's what they'll tell you. Don't you just want to move forward? Don't you just want some closure? Plead guilty. So the discrepancies also in drug crimes. You can only get a finite number of years if you are found with drugs. If you are not found with drugs, but they have you on Facebook Messenger trying to get an 8-ball, all of a sudden that conspiracy could land you 25 to life. Based on what they have at their disposal to get the highest years, and they're also going to pay attention to where they bring the charge. If you're in Arkansas at the time and you have a federal judge who is known to give out lower sentences, but somebody at one point was in Tarrant County, Texas, which is in Fort Worth. And there was a judge there where he had a couple years left on the bench, before he was going to just retire for health. His goal in life was to sentence 1 million more years on drug offenses. If you are a federal prosecutor, where are you going to bring those charges? So they know exactly what they're doing. They knew what they were doing when they charged me in a very conservative part of Georgia. Another example to use my charge is that, Daniel Hale pled guilty. He leaked several documents to the Intercept. He was taken into custody in 2021. And he was sentenced. He rejected his plea deal. The prosecution was asking for 9 years. The federal sentencing guideline called for at least 8 years. And a judge in Arlington, Virginia, who actually had experience with national security, said, he violated the law, but I'm going to go below the guidelines and give him 46 months. So the discrepancies are already there. I mean, we can sit there and scream that it's not fair and get that soundbite out. But until you really experience it firsthand or you see it firsthand once you're doing crime, nobody really likes to talk about their sentences because your behavior, what you did to wind up there, doesn't determine your crime. It doesn't determine your sentence. I'm sorry. The lawyer you had, pressure you put on the prosecution, how many times you acted like you were going to take it to trial, where you were charged, what your skin color is, your gender, what you look like, your affiliation, all of that is going to play so much more than the actual conduct, which is why so many people have been caught releasing information. And if you have the resources to fight it, if you are well known in the public, if they can't just refabricate your life into being something that it's not, like in the example of General Petraeus, as far as he fell, he was never charged for giving that information to the reporter. He was never charged under the UCMJ for having an affair. There were zero consequences other than his reputation suffered. But look what's happened in the past couple of years. Now he's the go-to talking head on MSNBC about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So he's made it back and more simply by being who he is. Simply by using his rank and his position in society.
Yeah, that's so crazy. And just so you know, really, Josh has to step off for a sec because he had a previous engagement. But I just have a few more questions if you got just a little more time. Okay. See you later, Josh.
Yeah, I'll jump up. Reality, thank you so much, man. What a pleasure to meet you and hear your story. And we're in support of you. Just let us know how we can help in any way. All right. Great to see you,
Josh. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So what's, I guess, like, what's next for you? I saw that there's like a Broadway play. Like, are you going to be performing or something? Playing yourself there. You do some art that's going to be in Germany. Like, what's next for reality?
Yes, so I do have an art collection that premieres in Germany. Unfortunately, because of my plea deal, anything associated with my life story, to include like the incarceration or the prosecution or my charge, I can't make money from it. So like pretty much 90% of the pieces I made while in prison, or I made when I came out of prison based off of my experience in prison, like they're not, I can't sell them for revenue, no matter what. Anybody like, oh, I need that in my home. Okay, well, you can have it because I can't make money from it. But I am happy to get my story out and have my art seen, because maybe someday I will be making art not related to my life or incarceration, and maybe it'll be fair game. I coach CrossFit full time. I take care of my dogs and my horse. I am thinking about starting a nonprofit that will bring CrossFit memberships to disadvantaged youth, because I know that participating in sports in high school, as healthy as it is, it's a privilege. You know, even though you don't have to pay per month that you're engaged in the sport, you pay for the equipment. You need to have stable transportation, and not every family can do that. But if we have a program where local CrossFit gyms are willing to subsidize or take on the cost of their membership, and then a member of their family, now you have working parents, working families who can say, well, I can afford an hour out of my day to take my son or daughter to CrossFit, and we can both work out together because both of our memberships are being covered. And then we can also do a mentorship program where we take service members, first responders, even people in the police, to basically mentor one of these and become close to their family, and maybe be their ride or be their sponsor in competitions, because competitions aren't free either, to build that gap, to build the bridge across that gap in our communities between the impoverished sections and our military members and our police forces. Not to reinforce the economic draft, but to build that rapport and to show that integrity. The way people carry themselves in the military is different, and it's positive. And I want to bring that to people who are at risk of getting sucked up into either the criminal juvenile justice system or the adult criminal justice system.
That's so awesome. So it kind of sounds like to me that you're kind of ready to move on, maybe from this chapter of your life, especially kind of with your desire to start a nonprofit that does not revolve around the Espionage Act, near as I can tell. And I'm curious on, what message would you have for our audience, or just the broader, global nationwide audience, that still want to paint you in a negative light? I said at the top that, I really respect what you did. You also confessed, you said, hey, what I did was wrong. I think that what you did was a service to the country. I know that that's not a popular opinion amongst everybody. So what would you tell to somebody, that still kind of views what you did as being unpatriotic, or bad for the country? Because I'd imagine you'll have to be saying this quite a bit, in order for you to move on. So what would you say?
I would say, unfortunately, we live in a time where your truth is relative to how you see the world and the messaging that you've received. And I would invite anybody to get to know me and to understand that I did violate an oath when I raised my right hand, saying that I would protect this information and I would not disclose it. And in doing so, I did break federal law, and I am aware of that. But that I did fully intend to bring this country forward. And it was not just like a deliberate anti-Trump action. My action was actually meant to challenge the right and left-wing media that could they take these same facts, black and white, on one piece of paper and give it in two opposite directions to their viewers. And I wanted this to be kind of like the litmus test that the American people could use and have people look at what's on the paper and say, my news, I get my news from MSNBC. They covered this, that, and the other, but they left out some facts. The same time they're looking at Fox News saying they covered these facts, but they didn't cover what MSNBC covered. And then someone on Fox News getting the other side, being able to read and understand. I wanted that to sort of shatter this idea that the only truth we're getting is from our side of the media. And, this was 2017. This was before the word algorithm was something we said every single day. This was before the whole, you're in a social media bubble. This was before we talked about that openly. And even though we do talk about it openly, people are even more entrenched in that, and the media's only become more powerful. And so, my experiment really was so that people could become media literate through seeing a series of facts, but then also being able to process how both sides of the media are giving it to their respective audiences. And that, there's a thing called partial truth that, but they also leave out the facts that contradict their messaging and their agenda. So that, I was anti-media. And so it kind of shows, that the mainstream media doesn't really cover my story except when it's to further their agenda, when it fits in, when my case can be used to determine whether or not the former president violated the Espionage Act or not. When, I'm saying that the federal use of it is highly politicized and was politicized against me. And now that skepticism appears to be in his favor, whether or not he violated it or not, I would rather have an Espionage Act that is black and white, and it's meant to just stop the transfer of the nation's defense information to hostile foreign nations. In retrieving those documents from Mar-a-Lago, it appears that had happened. And in continuing the investigation and the respective intelligence agencies doing their own damage control, that's stopping what happened. Whatever the FBI or whatever the DOJ does with it, I'm really apathetic because I know that whatever the DOJ does with this or does with this case, it's going to be politicized, and it's not necessarily going to be done with the intent to keep this from happening in the future until we actually reform these laws and make them specific and make them apolitical and create them to be watertight so that certain federal districts can't abuse them to either put somebody away or to keep somebody from ever being charged or being held accountable. So I think that the system is flawed, and I would rather see this being used as a time to reform it instead of, being further entrenched in the dysfunction and the politicization of it, just because somebody that is unpalatable to me needs to go down. I definitely don't see that. I don't believe in incarceration as the solution to this, which is why I don't call for Donald Trump to be jailed, because there's no safe, humane, or legal way to do so. He is a former president, so who do you house him with? Do you put him in general population, or do you put him in solitary confinement? And I myself have been put in solitary confinement based off of arbitrary and ignorant decisions by county jail captains who didn't understand my case. All along this way, people in the Justice Department who don't know what the word espionage is, or don't know that I wasn't charged for espionage, I was charged under one of the subcategories of 793E that doesn't actually involve espionage itself, treating me like a spy, treating me like somebody who needs to be kept in solitary confinement. And it was a really damaging part of my incarceration, which is why I want that cycle of abuse and that cycle of violence to end.
Gosh, that's heavy, and I think it's probably a good place for us to kind of close. So I just want you to know that I really appreciate you. I appreciate you giving us some of your time, and telling us your story. And I hope that our listeners and viewers will, hopefully get a chance to see a side of you that maybe they, won't be able to gather from like a 5-minute snippet on MSNBC or 60 Minutes or something like that. So thank you so much for just kind of being vulnerable with us and open. And and when you get your CrossFit thing off the ground, let me know. Maybe we can put a commercial in for you or something to kind of get your thing going. And
yeah, I will be pushing the fundraising so hard for that to get these kids to CrossFit.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I went to the VA recently and the doctor said I gained like an extra 15 pounds, but she wasn't wrong. But, so like maybe I can also help, be I don't know, not be a model. Anyways, thank you. Thank you, Reality, for everything and for our viewers. And we will see everybody next week. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.